Okay then, brilliant. Well, thank you. Welcome. Thanks for joining my talk today. And I've had some great talks today. Really, some tough acts to follow, definitely. Anyway, on with the show. Let's learn how to not let something as silly as the law ruin all your hard work and planning for this year and beyond. So, of course, leading today's session is me, Michael from Rocket Mill. Very proud to say I work at Rocket Mill. And like Phil said, I specialize in implementation, integration, tailored solutions, and user consent, of course. Perhaps most importantly for today, many years' experience in paid ads as well. I quite like my new company photo there. I feel like it makes my head look quite big and my body look quite small, bit like a Funko Pop. Um, Sorry, I'm 20 seconds in and I'm already talking rubbish. Before we get going, I need to let you know that I'm not a legal expert. I'm just a guy who integrates things with other things. So there's a bit of knowledge I've picked up along the way, but please do not take anything I say as fully fledged legal advice. I'm not a legal expert. This judge's wig, it's not even attached. Strong wind would blow that off. I don't have a legal degree. Don't even have a degree, to be fair. I did 2 years of uni, decided I didn't like it. Went to go and work in a warehouse for minimum wage, which was certainly a character building experience. But you can trust me on certain things, but don't trust me to dictate the word of the law. So, for today's session, then, hopefully I won't be raising more questions than I answer. And there are still a lot of mysteries around this topic. I'm sure you're aware. It's all been a bit very sudden, all a bit confusing for all involved, it would seem. But at the very least, I'm going to tell you everything that I know. So then if you know more than me, then, you actually will know more than me. So rest assured with that. Right then. So the Digital Markets Act and I guess the lesser talked about Digital Services Act comes into action, or in the DSA's case, I think it is already in action. But they both come with different bits. And again, based totally on not very much, just my integrator's perspective. But I see the Digital Services Act as being a little bit more like GDPR, a bit more broad, a bit more wider reaching, a bit more the sort of thing you'd explicitly talk to a legal expert about. And it focuses on things like, transparency and safety online and how platforms deal with illegal content and also outlawing of dark patterns, no relation of mine, of course, and it's something that Jodie's talk touched on earlier, and that's the clamping down on trickery to make people opt into cookies when they don't want to, based on design and hiding things behind other things. So something certainly to be aware of there in terms of how you are presenting information on your website, particularly on your cookie banner and the preference centers. And then, of course, Digital Markets Act, very much a hot topic at the moment. It's all about user control and protecting privacy, building more on sort of like the e-privacy directive, I suppose, particularly, when it became enforceable as, the cookie law. And introduced the concept of gatekeepers as well. Very big processors of data around the web. So officially listed at the moment, and I imagine this will grow with time. You've got Apple and Amazon. You've got Alphabet, which is called Google and Android. You've got Meta, of course, Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, and WhatsApp. ByteDance, which is the parent company of TikTok, didn't know that, but they're in the mix. And also Microsoft, which I believe the scope is on, the Windows products and LinkedIn, but I didn't explicitly see Microsoft ads listed, which is very strange, but there you go. And of course, Digital Markets Act, as I'm sure you're very aware if you're attending today, Consent Mode V2 has been born out of all of those DMA requirements. And we have these two new parameters to get installed on the websites promptly. And they both relate to ads functionality. So the ads user data supposedly relates to the processing of user data, of course, which would impact ads features such as enhanced conversions, and then ad personalization, which has been heavily touted as being, the remarketing side of things. So enhanced conversions, remarketing I mean, remarketing certainly very useful. Enhanced conversions useful, certainly a nice to have. But the chat has been, there's just two features involved, so it's not too catastrophic, I suppose. But I think it goes a bit deeper than what some people think, is involved. So we'll cover that a bit later. Having a very quick look at what has changed with version 2, Google are now saying that there's, two versions of an installation you could have, where version 1 was very much focused on the cookieless tracking side for people that opt out of tracking. V2 Advanced looks very similar, just with a few extra parameters involved. And then we have the basic installation, which they are saying is a bit, bit of a new option. But like Marcus said in the talk before mine, you could have technically done it with V1, but Google didn't really speak about it. I'm not entirely sure why you would have done it if the main selling point was the cookieless side. But anyway, you do have that option, and it would be ideal for those perhaps who have not yet run V1 but want to get something in place for that deadline. Or perhaps you work in a sensitive industry and want to err on the side of caution by not doing the cookieless tracking. Even if, like some people have raised today, if you believe it's wrong to track people that don't want to opt into tracking, even though, your consent management platform looks at things like cookies and local storage and session storage, things that are stored in a user's browser, whether they want that to happen or not. You may object to, you might think it's ethically wrong to track someone who doesn't want to be tracked. So this would be a good option there. Also, something I see more and more actually is sites that have problems with auto blocking, where Google Tag Manager is being blocked by mistake, so you can't really run that cookieless tracking anyway. So, V2 Basic is your only option until you get that fixed. Right then, so the exact scope of what is required of us and the scope of consent mode version 2 itself hasn't been made exactly crystal clear by Google. So looking at their official wording, at least the version that's most recently I've looked at, here we see that, of course, advertisers must adhere to the EU consent policy to use ad personalization. And even though that is a new parameter of version 2, actually that bit isn't very new at all. That's been part of Google's terms for many years now, and you'll be presented with that, say, if you try and turn on Google Signals, which again has been it's even part of Universal Analytics, not only GA4. So, okay, on board with that so far. I think it's a little bit murkier where it says that it'll impact measurement features, certainly on the websites, for all tags that send data to Google. And I guess when you think about Google's tags, they are almost all ads and analytics related. Surely domain verification codes wouldn't count under that. Of course, Google Optimize is no more. The Google Conversion Linker is ads and analytics based, of course. Interestingly, for Google Ads, the dynamic call conversions tag isn't yet compatible, but I think, rumor is that it is going to be. So interesting. And also note in this paragraph that, of course, despite consent mode v2 being web-based or app-based even, imported conversions are also in the scope of these new regulations. So then we go one level deeper where it gets a little bit more confusing because, of course, ad personalization was meant to be the remarketing side, but here they've got ad personalization and remarketing classed separately. And then it says to keep using measurement, which is a very broad term. Is that, all analytics, conversions, clicks, impressions? Something I wish they clarify up front because we get lots and lots of questions about that. And also here you see a mix of the EEA, the European Economic Area, and the EU, which of course are similar but different. And you'll see that commonly throughout all the official wording with regards to consent mode v2. So in a more recently updated guide, more on the technical side, once again, Google confirmed that remarketing and personalized advertising are indeed separate. And perhaps more interestingly, ad user data includes user ID as well. And again, it doesn't specify, is this just the ads conversion tag user ID feature? Does it impact GA4's user ID as well? Haven't found a clear answer, but I'm happy to assume it's just the ads conversion tag version, but happy to be proved wrong, or rather not happy because that causes a bit of an extra headache. Speaking of headaches, when I'm usually very confused about all things Google, I looked to Ginny Marvin, who is absolutely fantastic and great at explaining things and understandable terms. So of course, I mean, she's quite internet famous, but if you aren't following her, that's a recommendation of mine today. However, for someone who's so good at putting things plainly, I'm still a little bit confused, even after some additional clarification, but she has given us some further context there. So the scope of consent mode v2 does apply to UK businesses as well. I know some people say we left the EU, none of this applies to us, but that's not true. Even if you aren't serving customers in the markets within the EEA, if you've got users coming to your website from those countries, from those territories, and they're being tracked, not necessarily being sold to, this regulation also applies. Luckily, she's cleared up what measurement means, the very broad term measurement there. It appears that this refers to conversion attribution to audiences. So when you look at your audiences report, where you see which conversions have been attributed to which audiences, particularly, looking between prospecting audiences and remarketing, that's quite handy, of course. And if you are fully utilizing remarketing and you've created an audience hierarchy using bid modifiers, this is really quite a handy feature. So it would be quite sad to lose that. Again, not all measurement, not a catastrophe, but still quite significant. Interestingly as well, the measurement bit doesn't seem to be held to that March deadline, just simply in 2024. So that might not be an immediate change if you aren't able to update to consent mode v2. And also, if you're doing everything properly, getting all integrated, something to be aware of is that customer match will require re-verification before the deadline. Otherwise, you'll just find that gets cut off. So even if you think you're up to date, you're all ready to go ahead, make sure you haven't missed that bit, because that could be quite key. So to consolidate all of the things we've learned, it's not just enhanced conversions and remarketing going to be impacted. Under each parameter, you've actually got a few considerations there and the anticipated effects on each after that deadline is hit. So feed-based remarketing, if you're doing that cool dynamic remarketing where you show the users the products they've just looked at, that will immediately cease to work following the March deadline. You've then got your remarketing audiences. If you haven't got consent mode v2 in place, simply they will remain, but the audience lists will simply decline as no new data will be processed. They'll dip under their usable list size, and then they'll be no longer, applicable or usable within your account. If you're, of course, splitting between observations and targeting audiences, your observation audiences are really good for your smart bidding to add an extra layer of differentiation between your audiences. So that's going to have an impact there. And also, if you are explicitly targeting people with audiences, that's going to lose effectiveness as that audience list drops. Data sharing between GA4 as well, particularly if you've got a really good GA4 setup with quite tailored tracking, that can lead to very powerful tailored audiences. Also, if you're lucky enough to hit the thresholds, predictive audiences from GA4, we found to be very powerful. Those will either stop immediately or dwindle like the other audience types. Of course, enhanced conversions, user ID, your cross-device attribution is going to go less accurate with the removal of those features. New customer acquisition bidding, of course, quite a new feature in Google Ads. That will stop working as a result. Prospecting audiences, where you think, even though you're not manually or purposefully processing user data, prospecting audiences draws upon data from a user's Google account, from their browser, from these third-party cookies, which are on their way out. So you might find that those audiences dwindle a bit prematurely as well. And again, customer match, if that's not sorted, that will be very most likely cut off straight away. Also, another consequence not pictured is that if you don't adhere to the consent policy, particularly the EU consent policy that Google have, your account could be suspended, banned, very bad things. So you don't want to be heading down that route now. Okay, moving on. So if you're a curious chap like me, you'll probably find it interesting to see what's going on behind the scenes of consent mode v2. That's why Marcus's talk before mine really had my attention there. I learned some stuff there. That was really good. I'm going to have to go away, process that myself. But I do have some interesting morsels, perhaps some extra ones here to give you a quick view of. And to put it in a nice visual, I've used Tag Assistant Companion. If you don't use that, it's quite handy. It's a bit like, well, it's identical to Google Tag Manager's Tag Assistant, but if you don't have access to someone's Google Tag Manager container, or you only have view access, you can use that to preview what's going on in a nice visual way. So here there's 3 of the new main parameters sent with every hit to Google, and a breakdown of those is such. So we've got DMA, which stands for, funny enough, DMA, the Digital Markets Act. And what you'll find this outputs is a 0 for elsewhere and a 1 for those browsing from within the European Economic Area. And you can test this yourself if you've got a good VPN, which will allow you to switch countries. I think that acts as a bit of a determiner for Google as to whether, the regulations apply to this user browsing in that moment. And then the behavior of the other significant parameters will also change depending on that as well. So next one being NPA, which is non-personalized ads. That refers to the ad personalization parameter. And then you also have DMA CPS, which stands for, or rather doesn't stand for, the Google Services Consent State. And I looked at this quite early on, and it seemed to be quite cut and dry. It would either be a 0 or a 1. And when you're outside of the DMA territories, it would either be present when denied or missing when consent has been granted. But I've seen some differing behaviors more recently, which are really quite maddening, actually. And I have a feeling it might also link to how your GA4 is set up, particularly doing ad personalization features through there as well. But the most interesting bit I find is that in the DMA territories, you can see the output of SYPHAM in that DMA CPS parameter. You think, SYPHAM, what is SYPHAM? It was quite a mystery for quite a while what SYPHAM meant. So let's have a look at our first proper mystery of the session. And SYPHAM, it's not a disease. In fact, it might surprise you. What could it be? What could it stand for? Well, happy to reveal each letter represents a different Google service. I mean, shopping's a bit of a weird one. Not hopping, but I guess S was already taken, so they had to do something. But of course, these are the sort of services that you commonly associate with Google Signals, where it draws all that extra contextual information about a logged in Google user from Chrome browser or YouTube or an Android device to supplement what you're already collecting by default. But how does that relate to what we can control? Because it doesn't seem to link to how Google Signals has been enabled or disabled within GA4 and how that's linked. Then I got to thinking maybe it's via a user's own My Activity section of their Google account. Maybe they can opt in and out themselves, but strangely not. It seems that if you go into your Google tag or your measurement stream settings, there will likely be some new additions in there, including managing your Google services. It's again completely separate to Google Signals. You can tick the boxes to choose which ones you'd like to have or opt into them all, which is recommended apparently. And then there's a link up the top saying it relates to the Digital Markets Act and to click here to learn more. And I think that's a bit generous because I didn't really learn a lot. Hopefully it's a guide that's going to be updated. But at the moment, it basically says this. It states that the settings apply if you're using GA4 with another of the SYPHAM services, like ads. Ads is the A of SYPHAM. So yeah, link in GA4 Google Ads. That's quite common. Okay, cool. Then goes on to say that the services can share data, but again, doesn't mention Google Signals or whether this even applies or, comes into it at all. And then it goes on to say that you can choose to link none, link all, or choose a selection. But absolutely no present idea as to why these should be adjusted in accordance to the regs, or whether this is indeed completely separate to Google Signals. And I wish I could tell you, but like I said, it's a mystery. So if you're going to keep your eye on something, certainly keep an eye out for this, because I imagine this is going to develop over the coming weeks. Which brings us swiftly to our next mystery. And of course, as part of Google Consent Mode v2, we've been given 3 separate ads-related consent parameters, but of course the user doesn't have any direct control over them. The official advice, which came out a little bit late from Google, does indeed say that if you're setting this up manually, all three parameters should reference the consent status relating to marketing cookies. So if a user allows marketing cookies, then all three parameters show granted. If they opt out, they all show denied. So they have no way of differentiating between them. And this is also what your CMP's built-in configuration is likely to do as well. And coincidentally, of course, Cookiebot, who spoke earlier in the day, they were very much ahead of the game with this, and they were, looked to as a bit of a model to follow there, which was, which was great. Certainly helpful for me. But of course, unless the user coming to your website is someone like us who's clued up on consent mode, your banner privacy preferences will appear exactly the same to them. Like, nothing's changed. And I thought maybe a DMA template would be planned by the major CMP providers, a bit like you do where you have your normal GDPR template and your TCF template, where the TCF template is a lot more granular, lots more sliders. Maybe they do a DMA one so these can be controlled. But I spoke to OneTrust support who simply said, no, they're not doing that. I also spoke to Cookiebot, in fact, Richard from Cookiebot, who spoke earlier, and he said, indeed, no, but he gave me the reason because. And that is because consent management platforms, even though heavily focused on cookie consent, it does indeed apply to their lesser known cousins, local storage and session storage keys. And a CMP will look to control things that are stored locally in a browser. And of course, the new consent mode v2 parameters don't relate to any kind of separate cookies. So they're almost, not applicable, if you like, and therefore no separate sliders. So I'm thinking about the situation. Let's say your DPO demands that these new parameters need to be controlled separately. And let's say you're using a reputable consent management platform that allows for custom categorizations. What you could do is create two first-party cookies with, storing no value, maybe just a binary value. And you do that either using JavaScript or maybe even your CMP will just allow you to add manual cookies. You might not even have to perform this first step, if you like. Just create some names. And then when you go into your CMP, you could then create two custom categories to classify these new cookies with. And then you could show them as separate sliders on your banner. However, I'm just solutionizing here. I don't actually recommend doing this because I feel that, Google have brought this out. They've introduced us to it. They've rushed this through. I think it's their responsibility to come out and actually explain what this all means and what actually has to happen. So for the meantime, I reckon, unless you're really pushed to, just, do what is required of you. Don't worry so much about the cookie banner, but also keep in mind what that means for all your cookieless hits as well, because ad user data and ad personalization is going to be denied for anyone getting cookieless ads hits, of course. Right then, so having a look at the strategy side of things, and let me tell you up front, the main strategy point to take away from today absolutely is get consent mode v2 implemented, and then, you're covered basically. But I do realize, of course, there are going to be some people that don't have developer resource, or perhaps they're a little bit late catching up with all of this. So it might be a bit of an impossible task. So there might be some things to prepare for, let's say, on that side. So let's cover all areas there. Let's see what effects you can expect. So let's have a look, of course, firstly at smart bidding. So depending on your current scenario and the scenario moving ahead, it's going to have different levels of impact. Of course, we look at example number 1 there. If you're simply moving from consent mode v1 to the advanced version of consent mode v2, the impact to your smart bidding is going to be low. Simply going to lose, what we assume is cookieless modeling features relating to ads personalization and ads user data. Of course, we can see in the code it's being sent to Google on a cookieless basis, whether it's been processed before. All a bit unknown, all a bit in Google's black box there, but otherwise all signals continue as usual. Second scenario, where you're moving from consent mode v2, maybe have change of heart, bit of consideration, actually no more cookieless tracking. Exercise caution of here, because of course you're going to lose that cookieless modeling. So if you trained smart bidding solutions on cookieless modeling, suddenly it gets cut off, there might be some disruption to performance there. Third option, where you simply haven't had consent mode before, you've simply just used Your CMP's consent logic to control tags firing should be low impact, either the same impact if you're going for the V2 basic installation, or probably enhanced if you're using the advanced installation and you're then going to supply it with that cookieless modeling data, which, could be a nice little performance boost for you. It's number 4 where you should exercise the most caution there. If, let's say, you've completely ignored consent regulations for the last few years, and it's only now with the threat that your ads performance has been threatened that you're like, quick, we need to catch up with the last few years of regulations, get a new consent management platform in place. We can't track 100% of users anymore. That is going to cause some disruption because your smart bidding is going to be used to be getting 100% of all collected data, and then it's going to move to just the compliantly collected data. So make sure you have expectations put in place around that. On the subject of smart bidding in general, I suppose, if you've seen the last webinar I did for MeasureMinds, bless you, and thank you very much for coming back to see number 2. But if you haven't, no worries. You can go and find it on the MeasureMinds YouTube channel. I hope it will be useful for you to view. Not just you, but also be a big hit with your friends and family as well. But until then, here's a really fast recap. So if you gave a dog space to explore, some good food, toys to stimulate his brain, it's probably going to be a well-behaved, functioning and reliable dog. But if you keep the dog locked up in a garage with nothing but boxes, feeding it on chips and ice cream, I think it's safe to assume that dog might grow up with some behavioral problems, probably low stamina, be a bit of a problem dog. And that analogy applies to how you treat your smart bidding and the the output you'll eventually get it by being a well-trained smart bidding solution. And I use that analogy because not only because it's quite fitting for the consent mode V2 situation, but also I'm really stoked on dogs at the moment. And that is because this is my new little puppy. His name is Yuki, named after the F1 driver Yuki Tsunoda. And coincidentally, Yuki is the Japanese word for snow and happiness, which I think is very fitting. Sometimes these things all fall into place for you. He's a little Korean Maltese, and he gets to come home next Friday. So I'm on cloud 9 at the moment. I can't wait to receive my new little puppy. Also, please observe there's me, picture of me sat on the floor there, relatively normal sized head and normal sized body there. So just like to point that out. Anyway, back to the metaphor. The more decent, robust learning data you can consistently supply your smart bidding strategies allows it to become more effective at generating efficient conversions. Note here that I've crossed out enhanced conversions under cookieless data because, of course, as part of the add user data parameter, if you're serving cookieless data to users, that's no longer going to be applicable. That's going to be denied by default. But as it came out slightly after release, it's actually not just a cookieless solution. It's actually really good at providing cross-device tracking as well. So that then gets refiled under the accuracy heading for those that opt in to be tracked traditionally via cookies. And of course, you might not be able to do all of these things for your ads account. There might be limitations in place, but maximizing these is the key to great results or getting great results from your smart bidding. However, if you don't have consent mode V2 in place by the March deadline, you can pretty much count out 3 of those 4 categories. I mean, I am disregarding the importance of things like your keyword targeting and your ad copy and your use of ad extensions, etc., focusing purely on the machine learning part here. But you can only really rely on that first area at a technical level. And that is, of course, to use portfolio bidding where you can to group similar groups of campaigns together so they can share learnings rather than applying bidding strategies at a campaign level. Also, make sure they're quite long-standing. You don't want to be chopping and changing them every 7 days because they're not going to have adequate enough data to really perform at an optimum level. And undisturbed as well, it's very good to put a portfolio bidding strategy in place and not keep changing the targets or keep adding and removing campaigns, certainly for its initial learning phase, because that will disrupt things and it will limit the output you get from it as well. And, this is important regardless of what your scenario is come the next month. By the way, if you are new to some of these ads features mentioned, there is a newish page deep in the conversion settings what will show you the setup status because, well, in fact, that's a great point. If you've had these features installed by either someone internally or by a third party, it's all very well and good being installed, but you also want to make sure that they are working correctly as well. So that'll be a good check to make now to make sure you've got nice green ticks and not, I think it's yellow triangles if there's something a bit iffy there. But yeah, I mean, the reason I raised that is there's been lots of set and forget going on in certain client accounts that I've worked with over the years. So, having it is one thing, making sure it's working is the key thing. And then finally, I suppose, what is everybody else up to? And that's a great question because Google Consent Mode seems to have dominated the headlines. You really have to dig deep, it seems, to find out what the other ad networks affected are going to be doing, what they need. From what I can tell, Meta, it's more of a transparency angle. So they're expected to be providing more dimensions and metrics within the ads reporting platform to demystify a few of those, historically confusing parts. Also recommend using the Facebook Conversions API if you'd like to capitalize on some additional data accuracy there. LinkedIn, it seems, are flipping it around. So they're giving new controls to LinkedIn users within the European Economic Area. And then they can say what they're happy to receive and not receive. So rather than that be defined by the websites they're visiting, it's actually defined by the users who have profiles on LinkedIn as to what they're happy with. And then Amazon are going to be adding some new explicit consent controls within Amazon user accounts. So works sort of similar to LinkedIn as I understand it. Microsoft Ads, as is tradition, bringing out their own consent mode, which is currently in beta. And I think it applies to both Microsoft Ads and Microsoft Clarity. Just the one ad storage parameter so far. But remember that strangely, Microsoft Ads apparently isn't in scope of Microsoft's gatekeepership, if you like. And note that it doesn't use the data layer like Google, it uses the UETQ array. So relatively easy to hook up still, but just an extra consideration to be checking moving forwards. TikTok, vastly different approach. They have appealed their status as gatekeeper. That appeal has been denied. So what they're about to do next, I'm not too sure, but certainly keep a close eye on the developments there. And yeah, basically that's all I've got for you today. So if anything, please remember to check your setup now. Even if you've been told it's working, make double sure that it is actually working before we hit the deadline date. Stay informed. There's clearly going to be some more news, some more details coming out in the coming weeks. So as much of a headache as it is, make sure you keep up to date there. Always consider your smart bidding because robust smart bidding is going to be really key to getting great results, certainly impacting your bottom line results. Supplement machine learning where possible. Even if you're using some of those product features, some of those are slightly out of reach. I recommend dedicating some time to getting those additional features installed just so we can continue supplementing and helping feed your smart bidding solutions. And of course, when it comes to legal stuff, don't just make assumptions, do get proper legal advice. And that is everything. I've been Michael from Rocket Mill. Thank you very much for watching.
Cool. Thanks for that, Michael. That's some very colourful and great slides in there. And yeah, love the wig at the start. I'm just seeing if we've got any questions in Q&A. I've no one's added anything. I'm just checking the chat. I did post the video from the last event that you did for us. So that was when the YouTube videos were free. Unfortunately, now we have to kind of cover our costs. So there's three ways people can get access to the videos. All the speakers get free access. Cookiebot have got about 20 voucher codes to hand out in about 48 hours time. Or people can buy access to the videos for £95 plus VAT. Or they can sign up for a trial Cookiebot account, pay for 1 month, and they would also get access to videos, which about £12 per month if they do it that way. The Um, yeah, I agree on in terms of Bing. That's the conclusion that I've reached. I think Bing appears to have got an exception. However, LinkedIn is not, and that is caught. Uh, and yeah, TikTok, it seems like they're in sort of panic mode as well. But instead of like they haven't gone the Google way and just force advertise, like send out messages to every single advertiser. They've just kind of tried to, kick the can down the road a bit. The Yeah, so some great information there. I have posted your LinkedIn link into chat, and so people can sort of find you there. Uh, the We've got a 4-minute kind of ad break, so I'm also going to just put a link to the chat room, which is actually the first off. This is the speaker survey form. So if attendees, if you could fill this in, it means you get access to Michael's slides, and also you can say what you liked or what you would want changed on there. The breakout room, just as a reminder, that's on Zoom, so you can't be in two places in at once on Zoom. So, Michael, I don't know if you're around for the next 5-10 minutes or so. See if anyone else has got any further questions they want to ask you directly. There's one question that's just come in from Anna. Are there any extra steps to take meta ads to TCF for 2.2? So that this is for if they're a publisher and they're running meta ads.
Sure, yeah.
Mm,
I will admit I am not too clued up on TCF 2.2, so unfortunately I can't give you any guidance there. But great question nonetheless.
from what I've seen on TCF, and just so people know, TCS only applies to publishers. It doesn't apply to anyone else, and never enable it within Cookiebot or Usercentrics unless you need it, because it adds a little warning on the cookie banner saying your data will be shared with 1,000 other companies. So you have to individually mark which companies it's shared with. Uh, um, the And that may be a direct support question. Normally the CMPs would cover that. So if it is Cookiebot running in advertiser mode, both Cookiebot and OneTrust both support TCF. I think even Usercentrics does. Usercentrics is a bit more TCF friendly because it's based off kind of vendors. So that's I would ask a CMP that question, not necessarily Facebook. Yeah, but it is strange that yeah, Facebook seems to be very quiet. Maybe they're kind of waiting for Google to sort of, a bit like with UTM tags and the data layer, whatever Google picks becomes the default. So they're just waiting for everyone to have got Google Consent Mode active, and then they just piggyback on that, which is obviously a JavaScript API. So um, the cool, Chris, are you ready with the ad slot video? Thanks again, Mike, for that talk. Some really great information there.